everyone. Welcome. Glad you could make it today. All right. I'm going to give an overview of what we're going to do, and then we'll get into the screen share and we'll go over questions, answers, and just have a good fun time. Sound like a plan? Awesome. Okay. So last week we worked on an application in Lovable that was generated using a PRD the week before. So we're iterating on this application as a ongoing example of how to implement pieces that tend to give people trouble when building an application with AI, and going through debugging processes, going through the process of adding features and making sure they're tested and functional. Because what tends to happen in these apps is you put in an awesome prompt and you get the first version and it looks really cool. But the moment you try to actually make it go live and usable for customers, you find out there's all sorts of stuff that's missing. So we're adding all those pieces in. That's going to be the plan today, going over different elements of that. Okay, this is the application that we've been working on in these examples. This is where we left off last call. And as a quick recap, it's a demonstration of an application for lead generation. So what this will do is collect people's information, and then it asks them questions to qualify them for a luxury vacation package. And then the goal would be that becomes a lead that somebody could follow up on. So we're kind of building that from the start to finish and going through the debugging process. Last week, we did some fun stuff, like found out how much of the information it built was fake. It didn't have really any connectivity, no database for storing information, no ability to edit the prompts or anything like that. We set a lot of that up and got to the point where we had our admin page. I'm going to open it up in the browser here. We have this little dashboard that we created last week so we can see our leads. We can manage the configuration. We set it up to have a placeholder for a webhook, which I'll be going over that today, and putting in qualification questions. So that's where we stopped last week. It's connected to a Supabase database for all of that information. So for this week, we're going to do a couple key things that are super important for this sort of application to be usable in terms of actually collecting the lead, actually asking the right questions, and sending that lead to somebody who could take action on it. Because that's kind of the goal of a little SaaS like this, is that it could, provide a real service, even though this is just a demo. The first thing I want to do is, everybody familiar with GitHub? It's different on each application, whether you're using Lovable or Bolt or Replit or anything else. It's different on each one, how they connect to GitHub. But at this point in the build, I definitely like to have it connected to GitHub in case we need to do advanced troubleshooting, or we pull it to a local machine and use a little more horsepower type of tool to do that. Or if just something goes wrong, we have multiple different commits and we can roll back. Creates a backup for us. So here in the Lovable, they make it really simple to connect to GitHub. You just go over here to this little GitHub icon in the top right and click that, and it shows this connect to GitHub. All right. So here is where your GitHub panel would be. Now I have my organization already connected. Once you connect it through Lovable, it's connected to all of your projects from a account level. It just doesn't sync those projects unless you tell it to. So once you go in, you're going to, if this does not say connected, you're going to click the little button here to connect to your GitHub account. And then you're going to go to manage, and this allows you to link the account. So again, mine is linked because I have several projects in Lovable, but it will show a button here to link it. So you do those two steps. Once that is done, you will then click this transfer project button, and you will choose the organization to transfer it to. I just have one connected. Okay. So it's one choice, but if I had multiple, then I could send it to different places. And I just connect that up here. And that puts the project in my GitHub. Now, with Lovable, what it does is every time it makes changes in the back end here to the code, it sends it to GitHub automatically. It commits it to your main branch. There's not like a ton of control in what's committed. It's just going to commit the change, and then you go and tell a fix and it commits the change. But at least you have that series of commits that if you needed to, you could roll back from, which is a little harder to do in the chat here because it tends to, after you've done a bunch of stuff, it tends to lose some of those restore points. It keeps the latest ones. But if you go back far enough on an app, you'll start losing those restore points. And this gives you those restore points back inside GitHub.
Hey, Courtney.
Yes.
We had a question in the chat. What's the difference between connected account and linking the account?
So in Lovable, you connect your admin account, but you might have multiple sub accounts in your GitHub account, depending on your setup. So then you link the sub account that you want connected to this project. So it's kind of like a hierarchy. In the case that I have here, the account that I have connected only has one sub account that I could link. It doesn't have multiple accounts that I could access and link to it. That was a great question. I like it. A little side info on what you might do with this. So once your project is up to GitHub, let's say you're going along here and Lovable just can't fix an issue. There's a lot of cool tools like Cursor, Windsurf, things like that. Like, is it this one? Yeah, this AI code editor. It goes into VS Code and you can actually edit the code on your computer, and it has an agent built in that's like a much more advanced agent for editing code. So if you get stuck in something like Lovable, as long as you have it on GitHub, you can then pull it down to your computer and use an advanced editor to do that. I'm going to show you one a little bit later that I'm really loving for that sort of work. It's extremely capable. It does some really cool stuff. So I'll show you that in a bit. But all right, so right here, the first thing that I want to address in this application is the fact that when you go to add a question, you log in and you go to add a question. These are the questions we want to qualify the leads with, right? When I go to add a question, nothing happens. We don't have any activity here. If I inspect, I'm going to show you a cool trick for seeing if there's something going on in the back end. I don't have any errors. So there's no errors when I click that. And one other thing, when you're trying to figure out if a button is functional or doing what it's supposed to do or not, you go over here to network and watch the page load here. All right. So these little named items are what has loaded in. If this button is functional, it should show a network call here. But when I click either of these buttons, nothing shows. So there is no connection at all that is apparent in these buttons. I'd like to fix that as the first thing. Since we set it up, we want to be able to add questions, and currently we cannot. So let's go do that. Sound like a plan? Okay. All right, so we're going to do a little prompt here. We're going to tell it what behavior we're trying to do and ask it what it expects the behavior to be. Went into the admin portal, tried to add a question. Nothing happens when I click the button. And we're going to say, please look at the code and tell me what the expected behavior is based on the code. And of course, always when you're doing debugging, you add do not make changes, because we want it to find the expected behavior and see if our understanding of what's supposed to happen and its understanding align or not. We don't want it making changes just to appease our question. So we're going to ask it that and see what it comes up with here. There is a piece I want to show you in the back end. This is the chat config that it built. And we can see here that it's using these questions by default. It created these in the first version of the application, dropped in a placeholder webhook and a completion message. And that's all it's using for its question set right now. We want to be able to change those without having to go into code. Of course, you could just go in and write new questions here, but we want to be able to change those without having to go into code. And in the event we wanted to have like some sort of AI reroute the questions or things like that, having them in the database is going to be a lot more effective. So we're working on replacing this piece out with the database function in the backend. Okay, it says there's a couple of them, and right here, none of the buttons have actual functionality. There's UI elements with no on-click handlers. So that matches what we saw. We didn't see any action in the network panel when we click those buttons. So we'll go here. It says create a form component for editing questions, add click handlers, and implement the logic to save new questions to the database. So it just stubbed out the feature. Basically, it created a framework for the feature, placeholder for the feature, but didn't actually create the feature that we asked for. So that's why we ask about it first. I would like to know if it says that it needs a form component. I want it to check and make sure that it doesn't actually have a form component, that the form component is not already built. And of course, do not make changes. Right now, we are working on the ability to add a question in the backend so it can qualify leads. And we're going through to figure out what it built, what it did not build. Okay. So it does not have the form. So let's go ahead and tell it. Let's go back here and grab this piece that's our instruction set for what we need to do to create this. And let's see if it can execute. I would like you to do this piece, please. And do not change anything else about the app. All right, let's send that on its way and see what we get here from Lovable now that we've identified the reason these buttons don't work. And while that is running, I'm going to flip this back over so we can see what blinks back and forth on the front here as it's going. All right. What I'm going to do is show you something really cool here. This little application, KiloCode.ai, is an amazing coding tool for building much more advanced applications. So when you get beyond kind of the scope of what Replit plays nice with or any of the other tools, this is an add-on for VS Code, which is basically an integrated development environment for your computer. So VS Code you can download it for free, and then you can put this in for free because this is open source. And you only pay for your own AI tokens. So there's no membership needed. You just connect your own AI to it. I like to use OpenRouter. It has a really good OpenRouter integration, which connects to OpenRouter is one API key that connects to a ton of different large language models, all of the big ones and many, many that you've never heard of before. So it's a really good connection. And when you're using this tool, you only pay for your own credits. So you're not paying markup to Lovable or Replit or anybody else, using your own. This orchestrator mode here that they show on the screen is ridiculous. I gave it a refactor task this week. I had an application that had an issue and I needed to refactor a whole section, basically say, this was built wrong in Replit. I need to fix it. Here's what's wrong. Here's what it needs to be replaced with. Do all of these things. And Orchestrator just takes it and then it assigns it to all of these different pieces. So it goes to the architect and says, look at the code and tell me what I need to rebuild and write me a new architecture for this. And then it takes that back and it takes the first piece of the architecture, it goes into code and it says, all right, now code this piece of the architecture and give me a summary and write documentation. And then it takes it back and it says, okay, this piece isn't working right. So it sends it to debug and gets it debugged. And then it takes it back and says, okay, now we're ready for the next phase that architect made for us. And it will go through that and do this crazy, ridiculous rebuild of a feature or start from scratch on an app. It's got a tiny bit of a learning curve, but still very agentic. It's just you chat with it in normal like natural language. So if you are interested in trying what one of the most excellent AI coding tools out there, check out Kilo Code.
Well,
yes.
Would this, or is there any other tool that would look at your entire code base?
Yes. So Kilo will look at your entire code base. There is another one called Augment Code that will look at it as well. Let me see if I have a repository that I can open up real quick here, because that's a really good question. And if I can show you the setting, that would help with the understanding. This is the back end of a Kilo Code application. This is the control panel. And when you are wanting something to look at your entire code base, the beautiful thing about Kilo Code is it shows you exactly how much of the context window you have filled up when you go to do something. You get to basically control your response accuracy based on how full you let that context window get and how much you fill it up at the beginning. The settings I'm using are, it can read up to 20 of my files that I have open up here. You can give it more, but that would be a lot of context. And hopefully you're being a little surgical about what you're changing so that it's not having to take into account too much. And then I have it limited to accessing 200 files in the workspace that are related to the task I give. So it'll look at these first that I have open, so I can kind of guide it where I want it to look if I want to, or it will check up to 200 files in the code base that are related to what I'm trying to do. And then I have it set to use 500 lines of code. A good practice is to set up a rule in your coding to use files that are less than 400 lines long. Otherwise, it gets hard for these agents to read them and edit them. So that's a rule that I have set up in my files up here in the Kilo Code rules. I have that set up there. And if you have that rule and you say that your file size is 500, it's going to look there. And if you happen to have a file that's bigger, or maybe you're working on an app that Replit built and it made a 3,000 line file, it'll still cycle through that to find the piece of information it's going through. It's just going to look 500 lines at a time. But this way you can control how much of your context window you want it to have. If you wanted to read all the files, you just bring that all the way over and you have the full context of your entire application, but it'll fill up your context window fast. And when you're paying for your own AI tokens, you start to see the impact of giving it too much context. However, there is something I've noticed amazing about this. And I know this is kind of a diverge from our little app we're working on, but I think this is really interesting. It continues to keep the context of your conversation fully. So I'm like, it has a bar that shows you the context of your conversation, and it keeps the context of the conversation. And if you do a little bit of math on what you're paying for those tokens, there is, even with massive bulk discounts, there is no chance that tools like Replit and Lovable are actually keeping all of the context in the window in order to give you the credits for the price they give them. The math just would not work out. So they are truncating context, which is why the app tends to get lost on certain more complex tasks. And a tool like this doesn't get lost because it doesn't truncate any context. Pretty cool, right?
When you give it the rule to not create files more than 500 lines, so what would it do? Would it get to 400 lines and then create a part 2 of that file, or how would it go about it?
So that rule goes with another more general instruction to make everything modular. So what Replit and Lovable like to do is say, I have this functionality, and I'm going to put every piece of this functionality in one file. Let's imagine it's a chat window. It's going to have all of the input and output controls, all of the chat context, all of the message display rules, all of the refresh rules, all of that in one file. And that'll get to be 2,000 lines long. So you give it a rule that everything must be modular, and that none of the modules need to be, or should be more than 500 lines long. I tell mine 300 to 400 lines. And then when it builds that window, it's going to build a parent file that calls all of the functions necessary to make that work. And each of the functions are separated out into shorter files. So you need to change one piece of functionality, you don't accidentally affect the rest of the application. All right, let's go back over and see how our little Lovable app is doing here. Let us see what it has built. Implemented a question management system that allows us to add the questions, delete questions, add follow-up questions to main questions. I didn't point that out in the file over here, this source. So it has the main question, and then it has follow-up questions is the way this was built. So it went ahead and it supposedly added that feature. Let's see if it works. A reusable question form component and connected to Supabase, which we already set up Supabase last week. Okay, it said the build was unsuccessful. The app was showing here, so let's just see if it's actually unsuccessful or what. Property question key is missing, but required. Okay. That's not too bad of an error. Let's ask it to fix this. I'm going to paste the error, and we're going to say, please find the issue. Do not make changes. We don't want to go on off track and doing something crazy for us. In the meantime, let's take a look at our backend and go to our questions. Hey, we have a form. Let's go here. I had that list of questions that I showed you in the code, and I copied that over. So we're just going to copy that question here, and we're going to give it a question key, which it named those. I'm just using the ones that it created in the database or in the fake version to begin with. We're going to see if this creates. Hey, we have a question. It's pretty cool. Let's go here and see what it says. Okay. So that question key we just put in needs to have those to be optional for the follow-up questions. Do that fix and change nothing else. And I want to go back up here and see. So it created the ability to add the question. I do not believe it connected those questions to the front end yet. So let's do that next. As soon as it has this fix done, let's go ahead and add one more of the questions from the document that was there. Paste this in. The beauty of this structure that we're building is that when you're doing lead generation, you need to be able to test different variations of questions, different orders of questions. And this allows us to put different questions in and test that without having to rebuild the app. So that's why we're building it in this fashion rather than like hard coding stuff. Let's see what we have here. Okay, it says that has fixed. Now there is an interesting thing I see happen quite often on these applications, and we're going to test it, see if it happened on this one. It lets you save information and shows it here on the screen. And then as soon as you refresh or log out, log back in, everything is missing. Has anybody run into that before? Yeah, seeing some head nods there. That is because a lot of times, hey, we've got stuff. Let's sign out. Looks like we need to fix that sign out button. It's a future problem. Okay, so they're persisting. What this means is it's saved in the database, which is the goal. We wanted them to be saved in the database. A lot of times what Replit or Lovable or Bolt or anything like that will do is create a little in-memory storage that only runs when you have the app open. And as soon as you close it or log out, the in-memory storage is dumped and you lose everything. So before you go and if you create a survey tool like this or anything like that, don't go and add a bunch of stuff until you test and make sure that it's actually being stored. All right, so it says it fixed that had to do with the follow-up question. So let's see if they work. So this is a follow-up question. What activities you hope to experience during your vacation? Pretty cool follow-up question. Drop it in and see if it creates it. And there's our follow-up question. Pretty awesome. We're going to go to the next piece then, which is to see if these questions are being used. I'm virtually positive they're not, but let's ask it. Okay, I have added some questions. Can you tell me they will be used when I chat with the app? Are we still connected to the manual configuration file? Do not make changes. Okay. Awesome. That's going to run for a second. All right, let's see here. See the questions. They're currently being used by the chatbot, which was the assumption I had. And there's a qualification question array. Okay. So we wanted to have these. Can you please do this part? Do not make other changes. That's going to go forward. Let's see what we have here. So here we go. This is a chatbot component file is getting quite long, over 300 lines. So this is a nice little guide that Lovable puts in that we've kind of got our files to be too big, or they're coming up on too big. And this is, again, trying to control that context window so that the AI doesn't get lost. Let's see here. See what code it did. So here it grabbed the questions from the database. Okay. See how big this file is. 346. I'm not too worried about it yet, but that would be potentially a good file to break up soon. Let's take a look and see what it made. We have this. We're going to go test it out. Let's check and make sure that our questions didn't disappear with those changes. Okay. And let's edit this one and give it just a weird thing at the beginning so we can see if it actually includes this question or if it's still referencing the pre-configured ones in the backend. Because I had just copied this question from the pre-configured ones. And we're going to put in our contact info. Look at there. We've got our question from the backend. 1, 2, 3. It's pulling through. Shall we say city? City sounds fun. And then it goes to preferred travel dates. So this is using not the question that we added here, which tells me that somewhere in this flow, it's jumping back over to the pre-programmed texts that were in there before. So it built it halfway. Let's give it a little prompt here. Pulling the first question. But when I answer, it falls back to the hard-coded. Please review the code and tell me why. Don't make changes. Let me see what Lovable said. Okay, there's a problem with how the next question is determined. But we are running up on our time here. If you have things that you want to see demos of, like I'm going to keep showing key features, key troubleshooting, all of this stuff that is to get your applications from that 80% to ready to go live. And I'll keep showing that in these calls. But if there's a particular thing you run into this week, pretty sure all of you have my email from the invites to this call. Don't hesitate to just say, hey, if you get a chance, let's see if we can demo this issue or debug this sort of idea or show an example of that on the call. I'll take those into account, try to fit them in. Okay. All right. You all have an amazing day, and I will hope to see you back next week as we continue to learn more about AI apps. Cheers. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more videos like this, please like and follow. And if you need help building or finishing your app, click the link in my bio to book a one-on-one Zoom call to take a look at your project.